so let's review here. This is for Vietnam. Most of these questions, if not all of these questions, deal with Vietnam and through the 1960s, early 1970s. Leader of North Vietnam is the Ho Chi Minh. Leader of South Vietnam is Ngo Dinh Diem. A theory that claimed that if one country fell to communism, the rest would follow is domino theory. The Viet Cong was this rebel force in South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese that fought with the North were called the Viet Cong. The War Powers Act is something that you need to be familiar with, and this is limits the amount of power that the president has to conduct war. It makes it set in stone that the president must contact Congress within 48 hours of deployment, and then Congress has the opportunity to approve or disapprove that action. Gulf of Tonkin resolution was something put into effect after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which gives Johnson permission and authority to retaliate as a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident or the attack on the USS Maddox. A bump up of U.S. military forces in Vietnam was called escalation. The Secretary of Defense for Johnson is Robert McNamara. The gelled gasoline mixture that was used with firebombs was called napalm. A network of jungle paths used to bring weapons and supplies into South Vietnam, kind of going through Cambodia and Laos from North Vietnam. This is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The capital of North Vietnam is Hanoi. The capital of South Vietnam, Saigon. Dien Bien Phu was where the battle against the French. Ho Chi Minh conducted a battle against the French in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. The Geneva Accords divide North and South Vietnam at the 17th parallel. Remember that Korea is the 38th parallel, but Vietnam is the 17th parallel. The Arvn was the fighting army of the South, the army of South Vietnam that was allies with the United States forces. The name of the U.S. destroyer that was attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin was the USS Maddox. Senator Wayne Morse of Oregon was a senator, one of the only senators to actually vote against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Gulf of Tonkin resolution then led to full-scale attack of the North, a bombing campaign called Operation Rolling Thunder. Those that opposed the war, those politicians opposing the war were called Doves. Those that supported the war's goals were called Hawks. The Tet Offensive was this all-out offensive by the Viet Cong and the Northern Viet Minh, January 30th, 1968, marking the beginning also in the United States political history, marking the beginning of the presidential campaign of 1968. The Tet Offensive, combined with Johnson losing the Democrat primary in New Hampshire, led to Johnson's refusing to seek the Democrat nomination for the election of 1968, opening up the door then for McGovern and Humphreys and eventually Bobby Kennedy, all three running for the Democrat ticket in 1968, leading an opportunity for Nixon to get elected. So Nixon won the election of 1968, Nixon won the election of 1972. McGovern was the Democrat presidential candidate in 1972. McGovern. 26th Amendment to the Constitution provides for voting age of 18 years old. Mayor Daley. Daley was the mayor of Chicago during the conventions of 1968 in the summer. The Democrat campaign held their convention in Chicago in 1968. Kent State was a university in Ohio in which 4 students were killed during a Vietnam War protest. Henry Kissinger was a key foreign policy advisor for Nixon, and Henry Kissinger eventually won the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in negotiating an eventual end to the Vietnam War. Pentagon Papers, we spent some time talking about the Pentagon Papers and their the way in which they were revealed by Daniel Ellsberg to the New York Times, and these were documents that revealed that the government, especially the Department of Defense, had frequently misled the American people about the course of the war. And then lastly, Henry Cabot Lodge was the U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam, and this position was evacuated as the United States leaves Vietnam. Make sure that you look through those 10 things there for a map test. There is a map test, just 10 items. Don't take that for granted. Look that over. And then so the first 30 that I just went over are fill in the blanks. Then you have 10 for a map, and then you have an additional portion here with matching and multiple choice. Let me go through some of these. So the multiple choice questions, Robert Kennedy was a person who, during the early primaries of 1968, appeared likely to capture the Democrat nomination for president. It was probably Bobby Kennedy who was the most popular. Of course, then he is assassinated after he wins the California primary. Defoliants were used in Vietnam primarily to expose enemy hiding place and destroy food supplies. And that was in result of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Napalm, and then the defoliants were sprayed so the jungles wouldn't grow back. Spiro Agnew should be on your review sheet. Spiro Agnew is Richard Nixon's vice president initially. He's his 1968 running mate, Spiro Agnew. Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in Vietnam. Question here on the War Powers Act. Sets a 60-day limit on any presidential commitment of troops to foreign lands, 60 days after the initial 48 hours. Henry Kissinger knew about President Nixon's plan to bomb Cambodia. And so Nixon talks about trying to de-escalate the conflict, but his bombing of Cambodia was an effort to take out the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so in actuality, if you bomb Cambodia, you're including an additional country in this conflict, so it actually escalates the war a little bit. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's foreign policy advisor, was aware of this. Kent State University is where the National Guardsmen killed 4 students. New York Times is where the Pentagon Papers were published. And this was leaked by Daniel Ellsberg. 1972, George Wallace. George Wallace is the Democrat candidate that tries to challenge Nixon among other Democrats. And George Wallace, a Southerner, is shot and paralyzed from the waist down in 1972. Let's see. There's a name here called Lely Hayslip. Lely Hayslip. And this is an author of a book called When Heaven and Earth Changed Places. A very important book about Vietnam, critical of many aspects of the war. There are more than 58,000 Americans who died during Vietnam, more than 58,000. There is a group of activists called the HMONG, Hmong, and they are associated with the country of Laos. It is estimated that the war cost Americans $150 billion. $150 billion. And then there is this other book called Born on the 4th of July. And this was the author was a Vietnam vet who was handicapped, put in a wheelchair, and his name is Ron Kovic. William Westmoreland is the commander of the United States forces during Vietnam. William Westmoreland. And that pretty much, remember Robert McNamara is Secretary of Defense, Henry Kissinger is the key foreign policy advisor. He who enlightens is Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh means he who enlightens. So they kind of, that should be associated with Ho Chi Minh. And that pretty much sums up the review for Vietnam. Again, this test is 30 fill in the blank, and then you have 20 multiple choice, and then you have another 10 matching with 10 places on a map.